Hello everyone, welcome back. This section is on art of the Roman Empire, and these are the main objectives we'll keep in mind for this chapter. Explore the rise of Rome through its art and architecture, and we will also discuss Rome's portrayal of leadership, empire, military, and its legacy on Western culture. Something else we'll consider too is how Roman artists created a new form of idealism, very influenced by Greek ideals, and we'll see this, and how they presented historical events and propaganda, united portraiture, religion, and politics. So we are focusing on selected works that are emphasized on your study guide, but you'll also find additional resources on the other pages of this module. So let's see where we left off last time. So last time we ended Etruscan art with this 1st century before the Common Era bronze example of later Etruscan art. And we discussed how this visually represents the Roman Empire taking over Etruria. So just to kind of recollect this and see how this brought us to this chapter, around 509, Rome revolted, ousted Etruria and the Etruscan kings in order to form its republic. So we saw here that this figure wears the toga, the boots, and the cropped hair of the Roman politician, and the inscription showed his Etruscan origins, though he is now a Roman politician and orator now. So the larger significance of this work was that it really shows that Rome's dominance over Italy is complete. And we also saw this as an example of verism, this emphasis on the accurate reproductions of people, particularly people who are a little bit older, elder with higher status. And this was very popular during some of the phases of the Roman Republic, emphasizing experience and wisdom over this kind of idealized young male youth that we saw focused on during ancient Greek art. So in Rome's early years, it was governed by kings and an advisory body of leading citizens, basically the Senate. The population was divided into two classes. You had the patricians, who were the wealthy and powerful upper class, and the plebeians, a common class. So this kind of brings us up to that beginning portion of the chapter. And we're going to discuss Pompey now. So around 79 Common Era, Titus took power, and this was during around the time that Mount Vesuvius erupted as well too. So this brings us to kind of the first official image from our study guide of this chapter. And here we have a photograph first of Pompeii, which became a Roman colony around 80 before the Common Era. And when Mount Vesuvius erupted, Herculaneum and the neighboring Pompeii we see here were buried under volcanic ash. This was devastating, but of course this preserved what people have as far as the remains of Pompeii, because this was buried under 70 feet of volcanic ash. And as an example, what we see here, the artist Giovanni Fiorelli had the idea of doing this, and he poured plaster into hollow areas beneath ground to create casts of the people and their creations that were at Pompeii. So we see one of the examples. Among other people who did this, he was one of the people who thought to create plaster casts out of these hollow areas. So this gives us a sense of the daily lives, the customs, the practices, and the spiritual views of the people who resided there. So this is the image that you'll recognize from your text as well as on your list of images too in your study guide. So this is the Villa of Mysteries. So villas were the country houses of the wealthy Romans, and this villa was just outside the city's wall, preserved along with the houses within the wall's parameters. So this is in Pompeii. So some of the questions to keep in mind for this image, we have this mystery frieze of Dionysus here. It's about 5 feet tall, and again, this is from the Villa of Mysteries in Pompeii, somewhere dated approximately between 60 to 50 before the Common Era. So some of the questions to kind of think about the significance of this and what's portrayed here are these questions. For example, what is the narrative here? What is its purpose in this space? So pause this for a moment if you'd like, return to your text and see what you can remember about this. So what we have here is you see examples of wall paintings, and from around 200 before the Common Era, we saw that artists were creating this illusion of thin slabs of colored marble, and by around 80 before the Common Era, painters extended the space of a room visually with architectural details that were painted rather than modeled. So if you can see the top of this frieze, it's supported by these pilasters that are created entirely by paint. And we also see this use of intuitive perspective. And this is how artists kind of give this sense of this general impression of real space beyond the wall. It's not so much focused on this kind of vanishing point, and what we're going to see emphasized later, kind of hinted at during the last chapter. And if you take Art 5, you'll see the importance of one point perspective during the Renaissance. This is not that, this is intuitive perspective. So you have this kind of use of creating illusion through space, but not through this kind of use of vanishing points and this way that was really measured during the Renaissance. And the room's characteristic deep red color became known as Pompeian red. So these are very unique frescoes that remain. But as far as what's portrayed here, and as far as trying to determine what this site may have been used for, what we can do is kind of look to see this narrative that's portrayed through these frescoes. And this would have been portrayed in one room. This is how the wall kind of, first we would start here. This is the beginning of the narrative, and then we follow this narrative, and then it kind of ends right here. So this would have been one room and one kind of ongoing narrative here. So in the Villa of Mysteries, of the Mysteries at Pompeii, we see murals depicting this initiation rite into the cult of Bacchus. So Bacchus is the Roman counterpart to Dionysus. If you remember, he was the Greek god of wine and theater. And if we try to read and decipher the general interpretations of this fresco, we see that it begins with some type of initiation here. So what we see here is on the left, the young woman's mother has left her so that this initiate can kind of continue through this rite of passage, and the mother is not able to pass and join her in this rite of passage that she's about to experience as this initiate into the cult of Bacchus. And you see a boy reading the declaration of the initiation. And so here he is. Let's see, here he is. And here, this young female initiate, she holds a tray of offerings, such as myrtle and cakes, and she also wears a wreath. So she's basically the servant to the gods and goddesses. And if we follow this narrative into this next scene here, we see what may be, some people believe, another initiate. And to her right, we see this type of horse-like form of the Sileni playing a lyre. So let's follow this narration kind of to this next scene. And this is a pretty interesting one as well. So to the right here, if we look at this scene that we're focusing on, we see someone pouring wine as a woman suckles a goat. And to the right here, this initiate, as it's most likely the same girl, here she is, the same girl who began her initiation earlier, she continues passing through this initiation, and she seems to have experienced something called catabasis, which is basically a journey to the underworld as part of her initiation process. And if you look at the expression on her face, she seems scared, almost as if she's recoiling from something that she can see as she reacts with this very dramatic gesture. So let's look here at the next moment of this process here. So here we see Silenus, and he's a companion and mentor to Bacchus. And there's also a satyr who holds up a mask that evokes terror. And if you can see this here, this is the mask that's evoking the sense of terror. And you see another figure responding as he drinks and gazes at the reflected mask in the mirror. So this mirror may also reference the mirror Bacchus looks into as part of his Orphic rites. And to the right, central to this section of the frieze, here we have Bacchus. So here he is. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so here we have Bacchus here. And he's most likely inebriated as he rests on the lap of a goddess who may be Ariadne, or as well as other goddesses. People aren't really certain about that. So to the right here, there's this kind of enigmatic mountain-like shape. And some people speculate that it may be a reference to Mount Vesuvius, and some people believe that there may be some type of ritualistic, possibly phallic item beneath that as well, too. So as we follow this narrative, we see the woman undergoing this initiation has returned. And here she is. You can see how the wall would expand out here, that this is kind of a frontal close-up of this. So here she kneels before a priestess, as you have the dancing Maenads here and a winged female figure who seems to kind of, there's this figure near this dancing Maenad, and this figure seems to kind of physically discipline the the initiate as part of this process. And then you see that she carries a staff, which kind of shows that her initiation is becoming completed, but she's still kind of undergoing the rites of this initiation into this cult. So here, if we look at these last two scenes on the right here, we see that she is presented in clothing. If we look here at this kind of the penultimate one, you see that her rite is basically complete as Cupid shows her her own reflection in the mirror. And then finally, in this last scene, she sits on a throne in this costume that shows this kind of referencing her new position or status after undergoing this rite. So as far as the purpose of this room, it may have had ritualistic purposes for the cult of Bacchus as we see this initiate. And then, of course, a lot has been said. There are some references in your text, and a lot has been written about this kind of, underworld of Pompeii and this belief of a kind of a red light district in a sense. But a lot of people believe that this may have been used for the rites of passage of initiates or something related to the cult of Dionysus. So even though all of this is being speculated still. So our next image, let's see. Sorry, my PowerPoint seems to be frozen. Okay, there we go. So the next image we have here is Augustus Prima Porta. And this falls under the art of the early empire from approximately 27 before the Common Era to 96 Common Era. So Julius Caesar was killed around 44 before the Common Era, and Octavian was declared Augustus, and he established peace for 2 centuries. So Roman artists of the Augustan age created a new style, basically this new form of idealism that is very influenced by Greek classical ideals. And they enriched the art of portraiture. They recorded historical events on public monuments. And while it must have been important to distribute images of the ruler because statues such as these may have been the only way people would have seen rulers, this also would have contributed to this type of Roman narrative and possibly imperial propaganda. So these are a couple of questions to kind of think about this work. A few questions here. How is Augustus portrayed? How is his claim to divinity referenced? And what is the narrative on his breastplate? So as we consider how Augustus is portrayed, let's compare him to an image that is probably recognizable to you. Polyclitus' Doryphoros, spear-bearer. And as you remember, this was a Roman copy after an original by the Greek sculptor Polyclitus from approximately 450 to 440 before the Common Era. So Augustus Prima Porta was created around the early 1st century Common Era. And this was a copy of a bronze statue from around 20 before the Common Era. And this was marble that was originally colored. So the detail of this statue is naturalistic enough to be recognizable as Augustus, But here he's shown as he wanted to be remembered, as this probably, and so once again we're discussing Augustus Prima Porta, this probably does not reflect his actual age at the time this was sculpted. He's portrayed as being younger in idealized form, similar to the athletic build of Doryphoros on the left here. And even though Augustus is not nude, his breastplate emphasizes this musculature, this kind of emphasis on his physical strength. So we see this connection again between virtue, youth, and beauty that we saw emphasized in ancient Greece. But with the statue of a Roman ruler in this kind of recognizable stance of an orator with his arm raised, kind of similar to some of the other examples that we've looked at of similar politicians. So we see Verism is ending with the Roman Republic, and Augustus is appropriating his leadership and empire into the idealized canon we saw established by Polyclitus. But we see that he's reinterpreting this through Roman ideals. So let's take a look at his armor, and basically this breastplate that's called the cuirass. So the cuirass here has this dual purpose of political propaganda, and it's reinforced through this bronze breastplate here. So in this cuirass, we see myth and idealized service to Rome. Augustus is rescuing the standards. These were the flags that were previously taken from Rome. So he's rescuing these back for the people. And additionally, we see not only is he saving Rome from this period of instability, but we see his greatness referenced through his mythical and human lineage. So he was the adopted son of Julius Caesar. When Brutus and the conspirators assassinated the Caesar during the Ides of March, as some feared that Caesar would overthrow the Senate, this became a time of instability as the conspirators who assassinated him were unable to save the Republic, and this led to civil war and unrest. But when Augustus came to power, he established peace for 2 centuries. So we see this reference to his earthly lineage, as well as his ability to basically bring stability to Rome under his stable leadership. But we also see this reference to his mythical lineage, to Venus, as we see Cupid and the dolphin kind of reminding us where they appear at his leg on our left here. We see that this celebrates his lineage and achievements. So once again, his reference to his earthly lineage and his mythical lineage, as well as the stability that his power brought about, and the fact that he's idealized in this way that kind of reference back to Polyclitus's Doryphoros, all of this is emphasized through the statue. So the next image on your study guide is a Colosseum. And these are a couple of questions to kind of consider here. So how does the Colosseum emphasize Rome's architectural ideals through building materials and design? And the second question I can see was somehow deleted here. Basically, what is its legacy today? These are some of the questions we'll consider here. So how does the Colosseum emphasize Rome's architectural ideals, and what is its legacy today? Okay, so a couple things to consider here. Emperor Vespasian of the Imperial Flavian dynasty that you may have read about in your text began constructing this around 70 to 80 Common Era, also known as the Flavian Amphitheater. So this was Rome's greatest arena, and it later became known as a Colosseum because of the colossal statue that was nearby, not just referencing the size of this arena. So one of the ideas the Colosseum established is this emphasis on concrete structures and this movement away from marble that we saw as one of the prized materials in ancient Greece. So in contrast to stone, which was expensive and difficult to transport, concrete was more affordable, light, easy to transport, and very easy to pour on spot as well too. Part of the weaknesses, though, of course, all building materials have their pros and cons. Part of the weaknesses, one of the weaknesses is that concrete absorbed moisture and would deteriorate if unprotected. So builders put on a veneer such as a marble, stone, stucco kind of materials, painted plaster, some materials like these to protect this. So we considered this relationship when we discussed ancient Greek architecture, how in ancient Greece there was almost this kind of honoring of the natural shape of nature, whether it was something that was kind of built on at the top, the height of a city like the Acropolis, or built directly into the hillside like Epidaurus, the theater that we emphasized with ancient Greece. But this idea of kind of conforming to the shape of nature and kind of celebrating the form of nature, this becomes less relevant as Rome continues to expand. So we see how the Roman Empire, used architecture as a tool of conquest and expansion, basically, with its urban planning system on that grid-like system that we discussed with the Etruscans. You'll also notice too in the video that I post on another page of this module that even the architecture, it'll go a little bit more in depth to the different architectural orders that are used, and there are a variety at the site. There's this kind of association of the way people would interact with this space based on gender in reference to the architecture. For example, women were encouraged to sit on levels where the Ionic order was evident, and the Ionic order was considered to be kind of more feminine than the Doric order. So that's something you'll consider as you think kind of a little bit more critically about this architecture and the way it was designed when you watch that brief video that I posted. So let's take a look also at the inside of the Colosseum. When you consider arena design today, some features of the Colosseum continue influencing the way amphitheaters and our experience within them is organized, even down to the use of Roman numerals that designate multi-level seating, much like the Colosseum that we even have locally in Los Angeles. So as for the purpose of this site, the Romans were sports fans, and the Colosseum also housed spectators for animal hunts, performances, and fights to the death. So this site, as many of us know, as it's been a very popular subject for pop culture, films, this site was often used for blood sport as well too. And it's very important to consider how structures like the Colosseum have been influential to what some consider this public display of violence that some people believe have this kind of legacy that remains in Western culture. So it's important to keep these ideas in mind as we think about the significance of the Colosseum, structurally and symbolically. So again, to further consider this site, I posted a video about this with some questions you may want to consider to further reinforce those ideas. You don't have to answer those questions, just maybe think about those as you watch this very brief clip that I posted. This will reinforce what you've read and review why this structure is called the Colosseum. It will also review different orders of architecture within the site, such as Doric and Ionic, and where these are found. And also will once again reinforce why this was built in concrete and how this reflects urban and empirical development. And also something else that's interesting about this video that I posted, it significantly contrasts the limited liberties in Greece to this widening sense of inclusion and more extended opportunities for the diverse citizens of Rome. So let's move on to our next image. These are some questions we'll think about with the Column of Trajan. What does the Column of Trajan depict? What do building campaigns say about the leaders who initiate these? And what does it say about the Roman Empire as well as its builder, Trajan? So feel free to pause this and come back to this. So let's discuss a little bit of background context here. So Domitian, the last Flavian emperor, was assassinated in 96 Common Era, and he was succeeded by a senator, Nerva, who designated Trajan as his successor. So Trajan was a prolific builder. He was also sometimes referred to as the best citizen. also associated with his building campaigns, in which he really set out to build something lasting. If we remember back to ancient Egypt, there were leaders like Hatshepsut, for example, we saw, who understood that people building empires and establishing rule. These kind of great leaders, they leave their legacy through architecture. Not just so that people have these symbolic spaces, but so the empire, continues in a sense as well too. Very symbolic purposes for that. We also saw this with Pericles at the Acropolis. So we'll keep these ideas in mind as we see these through civilizations in perspective here. So under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest territorial expanse, and his successor Hadrian consolidated the empire's borders and imposed far-reaching social, governmental, and military reforms. During Augustus's reign, he paved the city's old Republican Forum, restored its temples and basilicas, and built an imperial forum. So these projects marked the beginning of a continuing effort to transform the capital into a magnificent monument to imperial rule, and basically celebrating all of the rule, the ideals, and the power of the Roman Empire. So I believe you have a picture in your book of the last and largest imperial forum that was built by Trajan and finished under Hadrian. But here, what we see this photograph of, after kind of going through some of that background context, is we're considering the Column of Trajan as seen through these ruins, through the Forum of Trajan. So this is constructed of expensive multicolored marble that would have emphasized the wealth of the empire and Trajan as well too. So this was completed sometime around 113 Common Era, and some of these dates are under speculation, and dedicated to Emperor Trajan in honor of his victory over Dacia, which is now Romania. And that was from approximately 101 to 102, or between 105 106. So this column that we see here consists of 22 different layers that would have appeared visually different as it would have been painted once. But as far as the narrative and argument about the strength of the empire under Trajan, this remains very decisive and very visible. So what we're supposed to do is kind of read this column beginning at the base. So basically starting down here. And then as it spirals up here through these different levels, you see the narrative continue. So the base of the column portrays weapons used in fighting the war, and also displays victory crowns and kind of images associated with conquest of the Romans. But what is emphasized here is this portrayal of the Roman building campaign to prepare for the war. So we'll see a close-up of this, but that is kind of what you see, as one of the clear narratives. You see the Romans preparing for this war. You see this very organized emphasis on the strong infrastructure of the Romans and what they feature as the defining strengths of their claim to civilization. And then you see the spiral kind of follows upward in the chronology of this column. You also have a number of different images and symbols that kind of tie into this narrative too, such as personifications of the Danube River as portrayed as this older bearded man, since the river is where the war started. And of course, Rome showed itself, its conquest kind of beginning during the war because of its organization and because of, what they visually show is the superiority of their ships, their organization as a civilization, and also their warriors. So let's see a close-up now. So here we see a close-up of one of the moments of this relief covering the Column of Trajan. So if I were to ask you which soldier is the Roman and which is the Dacian, which is basically the present-day Romanian, what do you think you would say? And how can you maybe contrast both civilizations through these soldiers? So you probably guessed here. You see in this photograph, you see the Roman soldier here is emphasized here. And you can tell that this is the Roman soldier because he is heavily armored and he is just one figure in this large military machine that you see kind of throughout this column. So we see the craftsmanship, the wealth of his weapons. We see that he definitely seems immovable as well too. And you see that through his posture, his stance, the look of confidence, and the superiority of his weapons, in a sense, that he is formidable compared to his opponent, who does not stand a chance. So we see here, this would have been the figure from present-day Romania. And he's bearded as opposed to the clean-shaven Romans. And he's also constructed, as well as the men behind him, to appear less organized, less effective, and also, by extension, less civilized than the Romans who are going to conquer him and his land. So this is not just constructed as a conquest for Trajan, it's also a conquest for Rome, and it's kind of argued in a sense through this kind of argument of propaganda that it is a victory for the conquest of civilization in a sense as well too. So let's look at our next image here. And here we have the Pantheon from approximately 110 through 128 Common Era. There are some vocabulary terms from your study guide here as well. You have a rotunda, which is basically a room within a building that is covered with a dome. So that's what we see here. And there, I posted one more image about this on another page in your module. But let's go over a couple of key ideas together here before you watch that. So the Pantheon was a temple dedicated to Mars, Venus, and Julius Caesar. And let's take a look inside here. So we see the rotunda from the outside, and we also see this colonnade. But let's take a look inside. So this is where we have another vocabulary term. So with this interior view of the dome of the Pantheon, you see inside of the rotunda where light comes through the oculus and illuminates the space inside these heavy concrete walls. So here you have the light kind of pouring through here. So the oculus, the circular opening in the center of a dome, this is something that we see being introduced through a lot of ancient architecture, but this is going to remain very relevant through Christian architecture, and it's going to be appropriated in some very notable examples we'll discuss. But some of the materials of this space, you have concrete, you have marble veneer, and you also have this large dome. Additionally, you also see the coiffure, and basically this is this succession of recessed squares and this kind of structural design inside of the rotunda. And your eyes are drawn upward over these patterns that are made by these sunken panels. So if you want to see a local recreation of this interior, you can visit the Getty Villa in Malibu, and you'll see this site, the Getty Villa, as a great local resource on chapters surrounding Aegean art, ancient Greek, and Roman works as well. And you'll see one of the rooms is definitely modeled after the Pantheon. So another point about the Pantheon too is just to kind of provide a harrowing example of this lasting legacy of ancient architecture from ancient Greece, ancient Rome. This was also the inspiration for Hitler's Berlin Dome that was never realized. But it very much modeled after this kind of sense of authority you see through architecture here. If you want to see, kind of as a side note, a recreation of this, if you happen to come across the series The Man in the High Castle, which is based on the Philip K. Dick book of that chilling premise that hypothetically explores what would have happened if the Nazis won the war, you'll see the recreation of the Berlin Dome. You'll recognize the oculus, this giant rotunda, the colonnade, and kind of how this ancient Roman architecture is associated with empirical power, and really very evident through that example, and how these visual and conceptual concerns in these spaces are appropriated into the aims of other leaders who want to claim power through architecture. So that is another brief clip that I posted on the Pantheon in this module. Let's look at a couple of other examples of work from this section. So this chapter discusses the imperial statuary and portraits as objects of propaganda that kind of made visual arguments for the power of the emperors. What we see here is Marcus Aurelius, this equestrian statue dating to approximately 176 Common Era. So it's bronze, it was originally gilded, and it's over 11 feet high. So just to kind of show from your list of images, from your vocabulary actually, an equestrian statue is a statue of a figure portrayed as a towering leader or savior, kind of on horseback. And this chapter discusses imperial statuary, and something that we see here as far as, what is kind of emphasized here, the way Marcus Aurelius is portrayed on horseback here. He succeeded Hadrian, and here his power is emphasized because he's represented without armor or weapons on this as part of this equestrian statue. And basically it's arguing that he conquers effortlessly by divine will without really needing armors, weapons. It's just kind of, divinely ordained that he will rule. And as far as our last example that we're going to focus on for this section, we have the Arch of Constantine. So this is art of the late Empire, around 3rd and 4th centuries Common Era. So the Roman Empire kind of declined from Commodus and plunged into anarchy around 235 Common Era. So there are numerous reasons people speculate why this happened, from corruption to economic reasons and also to the rise of Christianity. So as our last example for this section, we will focus on the Arch of Constantine, which is also this transitional work that brings us to our next section on Christian art, which is what we're going to be focusing on for upcoming chapters. So Constantine the Great battled Maxentius and beat him, and this victory was commemorated in a triumphal arch with 3 barrel vaulted passageways. So also, parts of earlier monuments, known as spolia, were reused for viewers to recall old Roman virtues. And as far as the new reliefs for the triumphal arch, these depict Constantine's public speech following the defeat. So he's appropriating the victories and actually these physical monuments, these portions of monuments from older monuments as well too, and sculptures of other powerful leaders, and he's kind of really putting himself in that lineage by appropriating those remains. And he's also referencing his victory too, once again through his public speech following the defeat. And we also see that Constantine is flanked by standing officials as well as seated statues of Marcus Aurelius and Hadrian. So let's take kind of a closer look here. So here we see Hadrian and Constantine here hunting boar and sacrificing it to Apollo. And we see Constantine addressing the Roman people in the Roman Forum. So this was a monument to Hadrian and reused in the Arch of Constantine. So what we see here is a two-dimensional hierarchic approach. And it's very removed from this classicizing illusionism of earlier imperial reliefs. So Constantine is known as one of the first kind of well-known Christian powerful leader to utilize this faith as a political tool of conquest as well too. So Christianity had become the official religion of the empire by the end of the 4th century, and non-Christians had become targets of persecution. So we will discuss Christianity in upcoming chapters, obviously, and focus on the ways in which it impacts art, architecture, and aesthetics. What we see here, though, we also continue, and we'll see this through early Christian art as well, too. There are some pagan references that you'll see in this chapter, as well as what we see here with the Arch of Constantine. We see, again, references to Constantine hunting boar, sacrificing this to Apollo, but we also know that he is believed to be kind of this first Christian emperor as well, too. So kind of to close this section, you may have noticed that artists working for Christian patrons in this chapter continued using pagan themes for some time as classical subject matter remained attractive to artists and patrons throughout the Roman period. In the West, many people continue to appreciate classical learning and to treasure Greek and Roman art. And in the East, classical traditions and styles were cultivated to become an enduring element of Byzantine art. But this is about to change, and Constantine's conquest as a Christian emperor changes the course of religious concerns of rule and subject matter in art, as we're going to discuss with our next section on early Christian art. So we're going to stop there. Feel free to let me know if you have questions about anything, and of course, look at your study guide, see if you have questions about the chapter, and if there's anything that was unclear and that I should clarify, please reach out to me and let me know. Okay, until next time, goodbye.